and welcome to this week's episode of the Scottish Property Podcast. My name is Stephen Clark, and I'm joined not only with my normal co-host, with Nick Ponte, but we've welcomed the first guest to come back on the Scottish Property Podcast for a third time, Jerry Alexander.
Thanks, Stephen. Does that mean am I now officially a co-host?
Yeah, I think it's like an honorary co-host, yeah.
And I was just saying there before, just so listeners know, we've got a YouTube channel as well. So get over to YouTube, subscribe to the Scottish Property Podcast. But Jerry did an episode on goal setting, and that's the most viewed YouTube video we've got. Like it's 4,000 or 5,000 views, which is quite good for us because all the rest are sitting at like 400 or 500 views.
That's definitely good for me too.
So we thought we'd get you back on, Jerry, and have more of a chat on current kind of market conditions, which are obviously on the forefront of everyone's mind. But because you're kind of unique in your kind of property strategy as well, you'll have a different outlook and different approach than myself and Nick, well, and maybe the general property investor. So yeah, give the audience that maybe haven't listened to your two previous episodes a little brief overview on who you are and what your property strategy is.
Yeah, okay, Stephen. So I started out in residential quite a long time ago now, before the last recession, and then I was trying to scale up. How do I find some scale? In the end, not through some super plan, I ended up doing some commercial stuff, and we kind of niched. We just niched fairly quickly into commercial multiple occupancy. So buildings that have multiple tenants, all sharing the same boiler, kitchen, toilets, all that sort of thing. And it gave us an opportunity to, yes, invest in commercial, but also an opportunity to operate commercial. So there's kind of two income streams there. And we've been doing that now for 18 years.
Nice. The first thing that kind of comes to my mind, and we're going to talk about kind of current situations, rise in energy, the energy crisis and the rise in energy costs. Yeah. You're taking that cost on behalf of your tenants then, like a lot of maybe HMO landlords are. How is that affecting you guys at the moment?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So our first sort of income is rental, if you will, and then we take care of all the service charges and utilities and everything else, and that is included in the rental that we put out to tenants or clients. And yeah, so there's a risk in there, right? Mm-hmm. The only difference with our model is that we have licenses and not leases. So our licenses renew on an annual basis. And we have in there an inflationary clause as well. Now, we know energy costs have not gone up by inflation, right? They've gone up slightly higher than that.
We wish.
Yeah. So, you know, a lot of our properties are fixed on 2 years. Some of those fixes, though, are coming to an end. I'll come back to that in a second on one of the scary prices we got given recently. But basically, it allows us to adjust fairly quickly. There's still a time lag. It's still 12 months. But if you think about it, people that joined us or signed a license maybe 6 months ago, well, in 6 months' time, there's a review. And people that joined a month ago, we'd already factored in the new pricing into our rental. So although there's a time lag, it's not as you would maybe on a longer lease, where you've got a service charge, which is a slightly different structure, and you have a cap, because quite often service charges in the past have been capped. And I think landlords who were trying to entice clients in and put a cap in thought, oh, we'll be all right with that. But now those caps might be coming back to bite them. Yeah. But one of the recent contracts where we do need to renew, and it's in February next year, we've been, or I say we, Diana and our team's been monitoring this, and we were paying about 25 grand a year on energy for this particular building, electric. And the contract prices came back at between 80 and 120 grand.
Wow.
Yeah. That reflects the price we were paying, which was a really good price. Mm-hmm. But also reflects that when we were looking at, or recently when we were looking at trying to check in for a new rate, they weren't even giving fixed rates. It was just, this is just variable. This is what it's going to be, or we think it's going to be. That's subsequently changed a little bit. It's come down a bit again, but we've still not fixed that one in. So we're not sure where that one's going to end up. But obviously the government has stepped in and put on a cap, or at least, yeah, let's call it a cap for the moment. but the energy companies still put on their margin. So although the cap initially seemed quite reasonable, actually it's still a reasonably high point that building might end up at.
As a business, then how are you looking to combat that? 'Cause I think one of your other buildings are on like biomass boilers with like the wood pellets and stuff like that. So you've already got probably precautions already in place for.
Yeah, so three of our portfolio of biomass. Biomass is an interesting one. It's still gone up. So when we first started buying a ton of, it comes in tons, right? Pellets is what we tend to buy. £180 a ton, I remember. Now it's about 350, but that's £180 a ton 10 years ago. So
Right.
over the last 10 years, it has been going up. Of
Well,
course,
just
as you would
much inflation right now.
expect, everything comes from Ukraine now, right? It used to be everything came from China, but everything comes from Ukraine. So all the pellets apparently used to come from Ukraine. So there has been a spike in prices. I mean, all our milk and egg and everything comes from Ukraine, right? I mean, so it's meant that I think our price has gone from about 280 to 350, but it's not quadrupled.
No.
So there's definitely a benefit coming out of that. Also, we were fortunate enough to get government subsidies based around that. So those are related to, I think it's CPI. Basically, they got by inflation. So that's got a bit of a hedge against it, which is good.
So we like to try and spin stuff around, obviously, and look at the positives and the negatives. But are you seeing a positive impact on the energy crisis at all?
There's definitely a silver lining for our market anyway, and we're starting to see that already. So there's been this huge shift, which could be several podcasts to discuss, right, about working from home, and then maybe not working from home, but working closer to home, and all this sort of stuff, and hybrid. And the challenge is depends on who you're talking to as to how it impacts them and how their view is. So, for instance, I remember during lockdown, I put a post. In fact, somebody else put a post. Gavin put a post out, and I copied it on LinkedIn, reposted it, and put some comment on it. And for some reason, the LinkedIn team picked it up, and it got shown to tens of thousands of people, right? And my comment basically was, look, this too shall pass. Everybody will eventually go back to some kind of normality around office space and cities, because at the end of the day, for 5,000 years, we've all been moving towards cities for a reason. Not, it's not because the state have made us go there. There's some benefits. And this post had loads of people coming back and saying, oh, well, it'd be typical of a commercial property investor to say everybody's going to be going back to commercial property, right? But the reality is, if you check through it, most of the people who had the negative comments were middle-aged, right? They could work from home because they had a spare room. Now, some people don't have a spare room, right? They had a family that was probably grown up. And also, they had the skill set and the connections and everything in place to be able to work from home. But if you are a young lawyer or a surveyor or anybody who's trying to learn a new skill, all those nuances that you pick up from people that are talking in the office, speaking to customers, advising during meetings and board meetings, all that sort of stuff, you can't pick that up on Zoom.
The other thing that's just kind of became right apparent to me right now is I know my wife's controlling the fucking Nest heating, right? And I'm sitting in my house freezing.
Yeah.
So is this becoming more apparent that because people are aware of utility costs, that they're probably at home going, well, I'm not putting the flipping heat on, or aware that they're paying it and going, well, I might as well just go and rent an office from Jerry because I know that it's all included in it.
You're absolutely right, Stephen. You brought me back to the question you asked. I mean, basically, those people have been working from home. Some have felt, that was a release and they wanted to do that. But now they're recognizing they're missing people. They're missing that kind of human interaction. But also, the point you're making is they're starting to realize, hold on a minute, I'm the one paying for all the heating of the office in the house.
Yeah.
If I wasn't here, the heating wouldn't be on all day.
I mean, just getting back to these energy costs as well, I've just got visions of you, Jerry, going around your buildings late at night, switching off all the lights and all that as well. Do you know what
That's
I mean?
been happening for years, Nick. There's things called PIR sensors. They're quite useful. They turn lights off, right?
They came in about 20 years ago, didn't they?
Yeah. So basically, we've been finding in our business lounges in particular and co-working space, more people are starting to drift back to using office space, maybe not the head office, but maybe more regional stuff. So some of our lounges are getting busier down to the fact that winter's coming in and people don't want to be heating their homes when they're working from home.
Right. That's an interesting point, because if you look at it from from a high level overview, you would think that that model would surely be in the decline, but you're saying the kind of exact opposite from the inquiries coming through.
So yeah, for us, and don't forget, we're a small, tiny little piece of this market, right?
Yeah.
But the other thing that's really interesting, if you think about our model being licenses, and you were saying earlier on about us locking in the utility costs into the rent, is that a lot of clients that are using lease space, so they may be renting an office for 5-year lease or 10-year lease, they're coming to the end of the lease. Now there's a decision point of, do I renew the lease? Do I need to renew the lease? And how do I fix my utilities? Mm-hmm. So of course our marketing is around, well, look, if you come and stay with us, you get at least 12 months fixed cost. You know exactly what you're going to be paying for the next 12 months, whatever happens in the fluctuations in utilities. So there are definitely more from the lease space moving over to flex space.
Yeah, so it's probably important to kind of highlight that point for the listeners as well, that maybe don't quite grasp that concept, that when we're talking about commercial property, we're not talking about all commercial property as the same entity. You're talking about the difference between a lease and a license, and I'm assuming, is that where you would think there'd be an opportunity coming up soon then in commercial space, with people giving up the leases and saying, well, we don't need this big space, or to stomach these huge energy costs now.
100%. And I was down at a conference in London last week, and some of the bigger providers down there are sharing how, number one, they're really, really full and busy, and that a lot of the new inquiries are from businesses that our leases have finished. Mm-hmm. So the industry, it's quite interesting to think about it. So you mentioned there's loads of different sectors in the industry, right? And even within sectors, the subsectors and all that usual nonsense, but the pie, the amount of people that are renting commercial space may contract or it may increase. The thing is, you need to be in a section where the pie, your portion of the pie, is getting bigger, right? And flex space is without a doubt getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So that piece of the pie is getting broader, and it allows new people to come into that sector and to benefit from some of the disruptions that's going on. So yeah, you say we try and look at a positive slant, and you have to, don't you? But the opportunities.
Guys, I love all this positive chat, right? But let's just get back to the main topics at hand here. We're in a crisis, energy crisis. Let me know, Jerry, do the government need to do more than 6 months of a cap
for commercial?
Yeah, so
for business.
Yeah,
they've
announced 6 months. It's not going to be enough, is it? Let's face it.
6 months is not certainty. So before we do any economics analysis, I'm not an economist, right? So this is just my own viewpoints. I just find it bizarre that
you're touching something that's very interesting there, because you're saying your demand's up, right? And Nick, on the last few weeks of the podcast, has mentioned about the demand for rental properties in Glasgow is ridiculous. You have to put your alerts on for an hour and then switch off, take it off the market, because there's just hundreds of people. So okay, we're talking about a recession. We're in a recession, let's face it. But your commercial investment strategy has got a bigger demand and growing. And from Nick's point of view, from the residential point of view, we've got a huge shortage in residential property, which is growing and causing the demand to be huge as well.
Yeah, and who knows where that might change. Mm-hmm. But Nick, I'm conscious you were saying that let's stop being so positive, right? So Stephen and I are very taking that and whipped you.
What are the? Yeah, come on, guys, just keep trying to squash me.
Let's focus in on some
people are listening to this. People with businesses are listening to this, and they are stressing, panicking about the future. The government have come out and said, we'll give you 6 months. So what happens after 6 months? Do they extend it, or do they need to let some businesses go to the wall? And is it time for some businesses to fail?
There's definitely a lot of zombies out there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of zombie businesses because interest rates have been so low. There was all the COVID's grants. There's just so much money sloshing around, right? So a tightening is definitely going to push some of those over. And of course, we've seen it, haven't we, in the retail sector? Some pretty large companies have gone, well, actually, imagine when the pressure gets even higher with business rates and interest, et cetera, So it'll be interesting to see in the wider sector what happens in commercial. But I think the first ones that are going to be hit with all this are the customer facing ones, the ones that have customers coming in on a day-to-day basis, making sales or purchases, sorry. And if they're not there, it has an immediate impact.
Pubs, restaurants, like that sort of thing.
Pubs, restaurants, yeah, these sorts of sectors. I mean, we've got a restaurant, as you know, and you know, it's been a struggle for 2 years. It's been really a really tough sector to be in. And it's so difficult to be able to predict what's going to come through the door each day. Sometimes you are mobbed, and other times, you know, staff and customers. Definitely going to be sectors that are going to struggle, Nick. There's no doubt about it. The cap, back to your question about 6 months, it's only a sticky plaster. It's a very, very, very expensive sticky plaster. And again, I'm not an economist, but we really should be tackling the root problem here.
Yeah. And
you're not giving, effectively what we're doing is we're saying, right, all these costs that we're being charged, we're going to pay through government, through businesses, whatever, and not actually tackling the root problem.
Yeah.
It's trying to just kind of give
which ultimately we'll all pay for at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
tell us, sorry, Jerry, you'd give me a case study, like because it's good to know, because people be thinking that don't have businesses or maybe interested in investing in commercial property. The extent of this, I think you gave me a case study of a woman that you chatted to. Are you able to share like the numbers involved? You know, we talked at the Glasgow event. I can't remember what the woman's business was, but I was taken aback by the figures that.
Oh, that was, you're talking about energy costs.
Yeah, sorry, energy costs. Yeah.
That was a lady who I don't know. I just heard her talking about her business. She was doing it was either glass blowing or
that was
ceramics, something, one or the other. And her energy bill was going from, it was similar to the one I spoke to you about. Her energy bill was going from like 20 grand up to 120. And I was just reflecting on the fact that it was a small business, a cottage business, and you can bet your bottom dollar she wasn't taking 100 grand a year out of it in profit.
That was the point. Yeah.
You know, and if her costs have gone up by 100 grand, yeah, that's going to be very, very difficult. Yeah. So there's some sectors that are really going to find it hard. But our job as entrepreneurs is to work out how it's going to affect us, and try and take a longer term view on what the opportunities are going to be and position ourselves for those. Otherwise, you might.
I'll put the shoe on the other foot for a second here. I rent a commercial unit off a landlord for my martial arts business, myself and my brother, and we had got an energy bill through. I mean, it's almost a non-profit. It's almost a hobby business that does on the side, and I enjoy doing it. It brings in a bit, but our energy prices were rattling and we couldn't fix them on. So we had looked at them. I mean, it's not on this scale. It's a first floor kind of office, 100 square meters that we've got a matted area, and then we use 3 or 4 nights a week. It's got 10 lights in it. There's not much getting run, but the energy price was going through the roof to make it look like this won't just wash its face and make a little bit of profit. This will go into a loss with an energy price like this. So I immediately kind of tried to hit it off quite quickly and spoke to my landlord about 2 months ago. Says, we've just been hit by an extra bill, and can you the building is split into 3 floors. Can you speak to the other tenants and see if they're having the same issues? Because if they are, we'll need to come up with some kind of solution. Now, the solution that I didn't want to come up with a problem to my landlord and say, look, this is the issue we're having right now, was let's look at something like solar panels on your building, because there is nothing in the building. There's nothing in place for it. Now, I'd done the cost analysis on solar panels probably 3 or 4 years ago, and I think it was like a 14 or 15 year payback. With energy prices the way it was, and looking at what we were kind of looking at, a rough estimate, it was a very, very quick payback for this landlord. And I said, well, maybe it's worth you investing, in the building to put in solar panels, reduce all our bills. It keeps all us, the 3 small businesses he has in his building, in business, which he'd get a major payback on it quite quickly. But he kind of dismissed it and shot it down and says, he's not willing to put the money into it, which is fine. And I said, well, here's our position, and I'm sure your other tenants will be in the exact same position. But if this business then becomes at a loss because of the energy prices, we'll have no option but to shut the door. It's as simple as that. It's simply economics. So yeah, I think you guys are both right. Businesses that aren't making big margins and getting hit with these costs will fold. I think they'll be the be all and end all.
Yeah, I mean, let's take another sector, hot food. Hot food guys, wow, yeah, because they're energy intensive, right?
Yeah,
So
constant refrigeration.
it's going to be really difficult, yeah.
What happens like when you are finding tenants, Jerry, and you're obviously, because you're renting out to businesses. So like we're in the residential,
Yeah.
There's a lot of checks we can do. Obviously you can't ever guarantee that anybody's going to pay the rent. Well, you can take out a rent guarantee policy, you can do all the checks that we do. Some people go as far as to pick certain sectors, people that people are employed by, like say for example, like it might be a safe bet at the moment to get a tenant who's a teacher or a nurse or something like that.
Yeah.
When it comes to commercial and you're now looking at renting out your spaces and that, what sort of checks can you do? Is there any mitigation that you can put in place to because at the end of the day, if we do hit a bad recession, businesses start really struggling, then that obviously comes back to you in some form.
Yeah, it does. But you have to remember the risk is different. So in Resi, particularly in Scotland, right, the risk when you have a bad tenant is that you have an extraordinary amount of time and money to try and do anything about it. In the wider, not just Scotland, but wider, the balance of power between the landlord and the tenant, or the licensor and the licensee, depending on what sector you're in, is much more level. You could even say it's slightly more towards the landlord. But at the end of the day, see, we don't have an AST. There is no standard contract. There's a license agreement or a lease, but there's loads of nuances in there, and you can have parts in there about irritancy, about removing the tenant. Sometimes it can be quite quick if they don't do X, Y, and Z. If somebody does leave and go bust, depending on how well you've read the market, you may be able to replace them reasonably quickly. So although the numbers can be higher in terms of the rent, the removal of a client who's not paying, or whatever the challenge is, can be much quicker.
Right.
So there's a balance there on the risk. It's less because it doesn't take quite so long to get them out. But you also have the ability within the leases and the license to foresee some of those challenges. But back to your thing about how do you vet people, we always meet them. We always meet them. We do the viewings. We ask questions that are fitted into the conversation, but quite deliberate. There are some checks you can do, background checks, company checks, director checks. But the other thing we do is in our business, we take a 2-month deposit.
Okay.
And they pay upfront. So if somebody doesn't pay for 3 months, you've actually got that covered.
Yeah.
Because you've already taken some money up front.
And like you say, it's a lot quicker to the process to basically get them out. I mean, do most of them, I would presume, if like your business goes bust and I'm renting a space from you, then there's no incentive to stick about anyway. Do you know what I mean? Because what would be the point?
No, there's not. And there's a little bit in the law about if there's goods in the location that have a value, then the landlord, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to say always, but the landlord usually has the ability to draw back some money through sale of some of those articles rather than going to the receiver.
I find that a very interesting point. I recently just fixed the term for my commercial for a 5-year lease, and it felt really, really weird because, like you touched on there, Jerry, the balance is certainly in favour when it comes to residential, in favour of the tenant. The license sounds like it is very, very much a bit of more balance, maybe tipping towards the landlord, but the lease felt like it was completely on my side. Like it felt like the balance was way to me, which felt strange. It's a full FRR lease where they'll take care of the building, the maintenance, the issues. It's there's a term, there's the breakout clause, and
when they give it back to you, Stephen, they have to give it back to you in the same condition or better. Yeah, it's incredible.
Personal guarantee for the business. If the business goes under, they've got to pay me the rent they were due. But like you say, you can keep an eye on that with your deposit a bit quicker as well and get them out, or I suppose talk to them. But yeah, no, that's a really interesting point for anyone that's listening. That's going to dictate and deliberating between commercial or residential. There's certain factors to think about.
Yeah,
What
and
about?
those lease. Sorry, Nick. Those leases licenses, so the clauses and everything in there are kind of like they're a bit of a deterrent, really, in my view. Yeah, you could try and work through the courts with them and everything else, but they're a deterrent for people not being delinquent, as it's called, on the rent. But ultimately, if you are on top of things, keeping in touch with the customer, and particularly in our scenario where a lot of the customers are with our staff, because we've got maybe 50 different businesses in a building, you get to understand on a day-to-day basis how that business is performing, because you meet them, you see them, you have questions, you see who comes to visit them, how much post they get, all that sort of stuff. So you're kind of on the front foot a little bit about their economic position. So you and because of our license agreements, it gives us the opportunity to maybe have a discussion with that client about whether the unit they've got is too big, whether they need to expand, they need to shrink. And if you're being flexible like that, and obviously you need new clients coming in all the time, but if you're flexible about that, it kind of heads off maybe some potential problem building up and up and up and up, and they owe you thousands and thousands of pounds, and everybody's screwed, right?
Yeah. No,
Sorry, Nick.
sense.
One of the questions that I had for you is about voids, right? So, like, I was just a couple of examples, right? So I was in Troon yesterday, my family just out for a wee day out. It's quite a small wee town. And I mean, sorry, this will really depend. This will be very sector specific as well. And you might not necessarily have an issue with voids, but in the commercial space and all the different sectors that you've got, I'm walking down the high street and there's just shop unit after shop unit. There's in the city centre office buildings that are lying empty. Like in the residential space, like I've got any one of my flats come up for let, I've got 200 to 500 people wanting to move in.
Yeah.
And I can literally, like, the tenant will move out one day and there'll be a new one moving in the next. Is that an issue at the moment? Voids for commercial landlords?
Sure, it can be, yeah.
Yeah. And if you get involved in the commercial space, then again, do you go for certain sectors? Like where do you go to? You know.
So that's why. So right, am I glass half full or half empty, right? So you know which side I sit on, and basically, to me, that is the great opportunity about commercial, Nick. Is it's not transparent. It's not easy to see why things are empty and why other things are full and doing well. It's not easy to see where pricing is, and often deals are done off market. So it's not transparent. It's quite opaque. But because of that, it hides opportunities. And I think the key thing with especially vacant stock is trying to work out, if I were to take that building on as an investor, do I understand market demand enough in that local area, never mind nationally, in that local area to reposition that property to be able to satisfy that demand? Taken as an example, pavilion office buildings. We're all used to driving around towns, new towns and old towns, where there's an office pavilion park on the outside of town and they're boarded up, or one's been shut down for years and years and years. And you're like, why isn't anybody doing anything with that? Well, what happened at some point is it was built for one tenant, and that tenant either moved and it was built by somebody else who rented to them and they moved, or they went bust. And now this building is in a receiver's hands. And when it's sitting with a receiver, they can, although they have to apply for it every year, they can apply for zero rates, business rates.
Right.
So these buildings sit in this little off-market kind of circle where it's just going round and round and round. If you bought the building and you couldn't put somebody in it immediately, you're going to have to start paying business rates. So a lot of these buildings just sit there empty.
Yeah.
Right. But of course, what you have to remember is they were built for one occupant. And right now, there's not many that's a very, very narrow sector, right? So there's not many single occupant companies out there that want to take on one of these office pavilions in your local area. It's just a really narrow market sector. So our job is to work out, well, how can I reposition this building to satisfy what the demand is right now? And that's where the clever bit comes in, right?
Yeah.
But it'll be the same for retail, but there are some that you can't save. And they might have been priced because often the price of the property is based on the income. So somebody might have bought a building that had Boots in it, right? And it had a 10-year lease and it was £100,000 a year lease. Well, they probably paid well over £1 million for that building. But now Boots have maybe moved out and there's no tenant. Who knows what the value is? Because people buy it based on the income. It's like this passive thing, right? That's what I used to think commercial was all about, was just buying an income stream.
Yeah.
But of course, when you get that void, there's no longer an income stream and there's a business rates to start paying. So if you're active rather than passive, if you're looking at commercial as active, now it's a different thing. So you're trying to look for opportunities in buildings that are currently struggling. This is me. I tend to buy old. I don't really build new. So what you really have to do is understand what the market demand is locally, and then work out if any of these problem buildings could be adapted for a reasonable amount of money to satisfy that local demand. So another wee example would be a lot of the shop units that are vacant in market towns right now are over the rates threshold for small business rates. So the rent might be £18,000. I'm talking specifically about Scotland right now, right? Yeah. Where we have a rates deduction if you're a small business. So if it's over £18,000, no matter what business takes it on, they will be paying business rates. And that can be quite significant. So what you find in some market towns, maybe not what you were just talking about, but certainly around where I am, and I think where Stephen is as well, quietly, all the small shops have been let and taken up by small independent businesses. But some of the larger ones are still vacant, right? Because people don't want to take on that extra cost of business rates. So if you find some of those units, is it possible to satisfy the demand for smaller units by subdividing it? Or if it's a long unit, which often they are, can you chop it in two with the bit out the back now becoming a different unit and the bit out the front being a different unit, which then, I mean, unfortunately, this is dealing with a factor that's there in place because of government decisions. But nevertheless, there is potentially an opportunity there to change a problem building into an opportunity for you.
Sorry to interrupt this podcast, but just wanted to let you know about the Scottish Property Podcast Christmas Ball, which is happening at the Village Hotel in Glasgow on Saturday the 3rd of December.
Can't wait. Myself and Stephen thought it'd be a great idea to have an end of year party like no other party to celebrate building this amazing community. There's going to be a whole range of people there to network with from the great and good of the Scottish Property Network. Whether you are single, bring your partner along, or if you're an office party, make it a work night out.
Early bird tickets are available on our website for £95, which include a welcome drink, 3-course dinner, live music, and a DJ up until 1 o'clock in the morning to allow us to party on. Hope to see you guys there.
Like you say, you can turn a building that's been lying empty for years, that's been, into something thriving. I love that. And that's exactly where you talk about the opportunity. And talking about the business rates things there, I listened to a guy on YouTube, a guy called James Sinclair, and he's always talking about how the business rates system needs to be really changed. And this is holding a lot of businesses back. And this is why there's all this problem with empty units and all this. Is that something that, do you agree with that? The business rates, is that really something that holds back the sector?
Business rates is a real challenge. Is that Ice Cream Man?
James Sinclair.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, at the end of the day, they need tax and earn bring in some revenue, right, to be able to provide services. So, they have to tax, but challenge is some of these tax regimes were built up for a different time and a different way that we operated. And now things have changed. Business rates still haven't changed. So there is a rates review due, but how much they'll make a difference, I don't know. But let's just take an example of the high street. The high street, their number one competitor now is warehouses that are selling stuff on the internet, right? We all know that. So the rates on the high street can be just horrendous. And the warehousing, they're still higher. But that sector has been very, very strong, the industrial sector. So I would think the rates there will go up. It's just whether the rates on the high street will come down enough to actually make an impact. I don't know. But the whole thing is a bit messed up. But it was a kind of a structure for an older time. And we've moved on as an economy on how we do things, haven't we?
One thing we've not covered yet, which has got to be the forefront in everyone's mind, is interest rates.
Yeah.
I think we've just had we had 3 or 4 increases. We went from 0.01 to 2.25, and as of recording yesterday, the pound just started dropping, and they were going to call an emergency meeting and put them up again.
Speculation, Stephen. They said they would consider it, but they haven't done it yet.
Stephen's been spending too much time with me like this last
I've been spending too much time watching your Instagram stories, Nick.
Talking about interest rates, right? So some market analysts and pundits are predicting 6% base rates by spring next year, Jerry. Talking about financing and how, commercial units are financed, because personally, I don't really know how you do your finance deals and that. And, obviously I understand with residential mortgages, you fix in for 2 or 5 years. How does it work with the likes when you're buying a building? And are you locking in? And...
So commercial and resi aren't really that different, in lots of aspects. A lot of the strategies, Stephen, you use and Nick, you use for buy-to-lets and things, it's exactly the same in commercial. The funding can be a little bit more diverse. So if you're looking at high street lending or even second tier lending, these guys will still do the same kind of deals. They'll offer you a fixed rate. They'll offer you a variable rate or a cap rate, although I haven't really seen cap rates recently. And the differences are that it tends to be more expensive and your loan to value tends to be wider. So you might have to put down 35% or 40%. The problem is as things tighten, the commercial market is seen as more risky. So those rates tend to move faster. So at the moment, I'm not saying like once you've got a rate set in, that's fine. But if you're looking at taking on a new property right now, yeah, the interest rates are going up significantly on commercial lending and could maybe look a little bit painful. And that I think it will take just a little bit of time for that to bleed through to opportunity, because at the moment vendors will still not really be changing their price point based on the fact that interest rates are going up. But obviously that will have an impact and feed through. But you can fix rates, you can have variable rates, you can have cap rates, Nick.
Similar thing. I mean, it just is. I don't know. Like again, I just might be too much a pessimist, but looking at some of my portfolio, if things go up to 6% base rate and all the rest of it, and I have to come to refinance out of deals, deals that are fixed that are coming to an end, then you really start to break even. Do you know what I mean?
That's Nick. That's the property cycle. I'm not saying they will go to 6%, but that is the property cycle. That's what's happened many times before.
That's the risk.
And 5 to 6% is, I mean, this is me maybe being slightly more pessimistic, but 5 to 6% is normal.
It's the norm, yeah.
And when I first started buying resi back in 2000 or whatever it was, that was quite normal. The problem is that some people have forgotten that. And we've been working on rates of 1%, 2%. Yeah,
ones would have been that price as well.
So there could be some collateral damage, particularly if, which people have been advising that might have to happen, is if the bank have to move quicker than already have. That's when you might see a little bit of blood on the streets, I'm afraid. But ultimately, it'll settle back in at whatever level it does. I don't think we're looking at anything much higher than that. As Mickey says, try not to predict anything, right?
We'll replay this in 6 months.
Yeah. But it is part of the cycle. So we just have to think, right, well, what do I need to do right now? Do I need to do any knee-jerk reactions right now? Or do I just need to be looking long-term? And if you're looking at new deals, obviously you're going to have to be pricing in stress testing here of a higher rate. That's the bottom line, isn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, let's put ourselves in people's shoes right now. would you be knee jerking? What would your reaction do? Or do you just sit, like you said, Jerry, do you sit kind of tight and you look at this long term approach that these are normal interest rates? We just had it so good for the last 10 years to recover from the last recession that was abnormal. Now we're back, or now it looks like we're going to go back into norm. But the
Stephen,
panic setting.
everybody's in a different place, though, aren't they? Some people might have started a property journey 2 weeks ago. Some people might have started 20 years ago. It depends when they entered the market. I definitely would, if you're panicking, you can't think straight. So you definitely need to take a chill pill and try and work out where your position is and where the risks are. There is that thing about the frog, though, isn't there? I mean, when I'm out walking the dog, I keep having this vision of this frog, right? You know, the frog in the pot when it gets boiled, yeah? You slowly heat up the water, or if you throw it in when the water's hot. And right now, I don't know how many of us feel like frogs out there, but at some point we're going to... You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, that's a
in
good
the pot.
one.
So the question is, you know, how many of us are going to sit in there like a frog, and how many of us have maybe built in a shelf because we've put in fixed rates and things to try and get through this period? But, you know, one option is to save money. Another option is to go out and make more money, isn't it?
Yeah, and I love that, mate. And I love it. I listen to all the material as well, and I read the books about more millionaires are made in a recession and all this stuff. But it's just trying to, like, when you're just, I maybe need to stop consuming so much news and Bloomberg and all the rest of it, because, like, I think that is affecting my
Think about
my
this,
mindset.
right? Think about this. When there's disruption, right, you have opportunity, and those two are really difficult to have without the other. So if you were looking for opportunity, you need to be looking for disruption and stuff that's going on. Otherwise, if everyone's just steady, it's actually quite difficult because there's not as much volatility.
Absolutely. And everyone's been complaining about that for the last couple of years. And the network saying that there's not much opportunities, there's not enough deals, blah, blah, blah. No, don't complain about it. This is opportunities now. Like you just put very well that the disruption is going to cause the opportunities.
And like you say, oh, sorry, mate, on you.
I just think that the pain point for us kind of residential guys are the ones that are more predominant in that sense, is when the fixed terms that we've just put in place over the last couple of years are coming to an end this year or next year, most likely probably next year. I'm even looking at the mortgages that I was fixing with Paragon particularly were the energy efficient ones where EPC was above at C or better. The rate was 2.75, and I think we fixed some like 14 or 15 mortgages towards the end of last year, beginning of this year on 2.75. That is going to be double. Like there's no doubt about it. By the time that comes up, that's going to be at least double. So I think that's going to be what everyone's got to look at in their portfolio and assess the interest rates. But as we've seen on the double-edged sword, the rents have been going up as well.
Yeah, they have, because supply and demand.
What,
right.
Jerry, getting back to the commercial stuff, and like one thing we've not touched on that's going to be a big thing in the whole property in the future, and the whole property industry is, you know, EPC requirements and stuff like that. Is that hitting commercial as well, and with minimum standards?
Yeah. Are we recording a new podcast, Nick? That's a big subject, right?
We're going to chop this up into 3 episodes.
Is it? Right. I just want to know, are you getting hit with the same regulations, minimum EPCC for 2025?
So right now I'm doing a refinance on a commercial property, and one of the stipulations from the second tier funder is it needs to be an EPC of E or above for them to give you finance. Talking about EPCs in terms of in terms of sales, yes, there is a minimum regulation for when you're trying to let out space, but it's when it's over 1,000 square meters.
Okay.
There are I can't remember the clause now. There's can't remember, sorry, but there is a process to go through if your property is not at that level, where you can still let it out, but you have to provide this particular, forgive me, I can't remember the bloody certificate name.
You sent me this through, because I had the same issue with my building.
Yeah, I've forgotten all the terms.
They had to have a minimum rating, but it wasn't. It was under 1,000 square meters. I think it was 680 odds, and you sent me the stuff through. Yeah.
So what's interesting though is ESG. which you'll hear more and more about, which is the environment, social, and governance. And a lot of corporates now, let's pick Dell or somebody like that. And I don't know if they're the right person, the companies to pick, but they're increasingly, with their shareholders and their purchasers and partners and everything, are looking at what are your environmental credentials, your social credentials, and your governance credentials. And it's all very well looking at your own business and saying, well, look, is my building energy efficient? Tick. Are my processes becoming more energy efficient? And are we sourcing locally rather than internationally? But then it starts going into the full supply chain, and you as a commercial property provider are part of that supply chain. So the corporates are now starting to ask about EPCs, but more than just EPC, they're starting to ask about your supply chain, because it needs to match their governance and their credentials they're looking for. So it will bleed into the sector. When you in the top end right now, some of my colleagues in the industry down in London, where they're letting out service space, the corporates, they are winning or losing new tenants based on their governance and their social impact and environmental impact. So these things are becoming more and more important at that level. Yeah. That will start bleeding into medium-sized businesses. It'll start bleeding into small businesses. Will the lady who does acupuncture in one of our units somewhere worry about it right now? No. Mm-hmm. But more and more smaller businesses will be forced down that track because the larger guys who they supply are asking them to do it. So in answer to your question, it's not just about EPCs. There's lots of other factors there too, which are going to start.
Which is another podcast, like you say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or listen to the Commercial Property Podcast by Jerry Alexander, which I'm sure you've probably covered in the past. Yeah. So I think I don't know what else is to talk about.
What about you, Nick? What do you think is going to be happening in the sector for the power that's happening? In terms of the caps coming in, what do you think people should be doing in terms of their
energy
portfolios?
Price cap. Did you say
Sorry?
energy price cap?
Yeah, the energy cap for tenants. Obviously, tenants in properties are getting that cap right now, but when it changes, how do you think that's going to affect the sector? Do you think we'll be balanced by then? Do you think we'll have come out of the issue and maybe prices should be a bit more sensible? Or
I think the energy crisis is like a 2-year problem. Like I just can't, it's at least 2 years. I just can't see everything being solved next year. Obviously we need to reduce our dependency on, well, the UK, obviously it's not got a huge dependency. I mean, like when you look at likes of Germany and stuff like that, they're really fucked. I mean, they need to come up with some solutions very quickly, but I guess it affects the whole market, doesn't it? Do you know what I mean? When they start pulling oil and gas and from elsewhere, then it affects the whole global market. So although we only take 3 or 4% of our imported gas from Russia, it affects our price, and that's not going to be solved anytime soon unless, like, miraculously they have some sort of resolution with Putin and the war ends and everything goes back to normal. But that's the problem, isn't it? It's driving things at the moment in the energy markets.
It's definitely a challenge, and the fact that it's all linked up.
Yeah.
That's where you're like, well, why can't we just keep our prices level because we get a lot from North Sea? Just because it's all linked up, I'm afraid.
Interesting though, Stephen's onto a good one, I think, with Aberdeen, because obviously they're ramping up production and they're issuing new licenses as well. A lot of the oil fields were, I don't know too much about them, but I have read that they're really, it's like whatever you want to do now, just go and drill there, wherever you want to go, just to try and ramp up production. But I think the storage,
Aberdeen prices back up.
I think the storage is an issue in this country, isn't it? We don't have the capacity to store the gas. We have to, I think sometimes we sell it to like Europe or something like that and then bring it back or something. That's all.
Just in time delivery. That's it.
Yeah.
It's in the ass now.
It's really like, it's a serious issue.
How are you looking at your portfolio, guys, in general? Then moving forward in this kind of turbulent times, are you liquidating? Are you looking to build in cash reserves? Are you looking to keep acquiring and keep growing as normal?
All of the above.
Mm. Mhm.
So I'm fortunate enough to be able to reflect on 2008 and 9 because we bought our first commercial in 2004. And at the time, for the next few years, I was struggling to buy stuff because Resi was coming into the sector and buying commercial units and trying to redevelop them, right? Sound familiar? So that's what was happening at the time. So it was really difficult. And then the proverbial hit the fan. And in 2008, start of 2008, or was it the start of 2009? Can't remember now. Everything stopped. Nobody was doing anything for like 3 months, right? It was like our precursor to the pandemic. Nobody was doing anything. Nobody was spending any money. Nobody was making any decisions. The world stopped. And of course, there was no money. That was the issue that time round. But then, fairly quickly after that, businesses started making decisions on what they were doing. So for us in our sector, we actually bought buildings at a better price and we were able to fill them quickly because the demand was there for our type of offer. So in 2009, we bought a building that was as a direct result of what was going on in the economy. And then in 2013, we bought a cracking deal. And that was based on a building that had gone through the 2008 and 9, but it was like a zombie building. And eventually, when everybody involved in it went past, we finally managed to buy this building. And it was actually it was a really good condition. The only problem was they weren't marketing it right. Nobody was paying any attention to it. And we managed to turn around the offer and make it work really well. But it was a consequence of 2008 and 9. It just took a long time for it to work through the system. So there's definitely going to be opportunities coming up because things change. So you do need to be a bit more liquid. But also, Stephen, the one you didn't mention there is we have to keep building our private investor sources.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, well, this is the thing is this time round, it's not a money issue, is it?
Exactly.
Well, I mean, when you've got interest rates going like they are, it is though, because it becomes a point where, say, for example, in my own circumstances, if you're buying £100,000 flat, and the mortgage, the new, this is a new purchase I'm talking about, and this time next year, say the base rate's at 6%, 7%, who knows? Buy to let mortgage rates are at 8%. It becomes a point where it just doesn't make sense. There's just nothing in it anymore. So there's absolutely no point investing in property unless you are going for the long-term capital gain, which, okay, we need to sit tight for a long time, potentially, if there's going to be a downturn next year. The thing, that I'm thinking is, would it be better just putting my money into like government bonds or something like that, where you're like, 4.5% at the moment?
Oh, see, this is where I think that private investment is going to get even easier. And we took a decision a couple of weeks ago when we're looking at the new mortgage rates coming in, going, if we're bringing in private investor finance at 5 and 6%, why put a mortgage in the property? Just keep using the private investor finance. It's pretty much cheap, similar borrowing. So why just keep leveraging? We're just thinking, right, okay, we'll buy the properties, we'll just keep the private investors, we'll pay them monthly out the cash off from the property. We've not got any arrangement fees, exit fees, legal fees, lending fees to go with the rigid bank system. We'll just use private investors finance. And then once it sorts itself out, it takes a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it does, then start leveraging up again.
Don't worry, Nick. Having this whole abundancy attitude to stuff can be difficult, right? But private finance is like a revelation. Once you finally get your head around private finance and that because you were saying there, well, there might not be so much money around. There is a lot of money out there that people have done well to earn or whatever, but they need a home for it to protect against inflation. And right now they're struggling because any of the traditional routes through banking and everything else, or the stock market is risky. There's a lot of risk out there.
Yeah.
If you've got the abundancy mindset about finance, and I still struggle with it, right? I'm still trying to work on that one all the time, but you can change, opportunities completely different now. So just think about it this way. If money wasn't a problem for you to raise money over the next 5 years, would you be quite excited about what's coming up? if money wasn't going to be a problem, you were just going to have, there's going to be money there whenever you have a deal.
Yeah, absolutely. But the argument that I'd put to you is that who, look, I know plenty of people sitting there with pots of cash that's doing absolutely nothing in the bank, right? But if we hit a recession, if we hit a property market crash, and we're really going down, then who is going to be giving you, what private investor is going to be giving you a bucket of cash to go and invest in property if we're going through a property crash?
If you're buying stuff on the open market straight off a right move,
market
and
value,
getting your finger, closing your eyes, and just sticking it on, I'll buy that one, then that's not a great strategy, right? You need to be finding opportunities. You need to be finding deals that work, but you're doing your stress testing based on the things you've just discussed. You're doing your stress testing based on, well, what happens if I have to pay this private investor 10%?
Yeah.
And what happens if the price goes, after I've done what I need to do to the property? So I bought it for 50, now it's worth 80, but what if it drops back down to 60? How does that affect things? You just have to, your stress testing has got to be a bit more robust. But let's face it, and I don't want to be full of flipping quotes, right? But everybody else, if that's happening, Nick, everybody else is running the other direction, right? They're all running away. So they're not going to be looking at deals as diligently as they maybe are right now. They're just going to be panicking and running the other direction. So there will be more stuff there, but it will be a bit chaotic.
No, I mean, like, in a way, I'm looking forward to it, right? Because like Stephen said, I've been complaining about finding it difficult to get deals and all the rest of it. So in a way, I'm like, I do see the opportunity. I picked up a few good opportunities back in 2010, when things started getting a bit easier to buy and all that, because I was lucky. I had, I was quite liquid at the time. I had a bit of cash. Same again this time. I'm like, to hold on to my cash just now. But the conundrum that I'm in at the moment is, do I go out and buy 5 or 6 buy-to-let properties, fix myself in at 5% interest rates, or do I hold my cash and wait until see what happens next year? Because potentially there's going to be a lot of households ending fixed term mortgages, and their payments are going to go up £300, £400, £500 a month on their mortgages once they come to the end of their fixed rates, which is going to cause, there's no doubt about it, there's going to be a crash in property next year. 15% maybe.
A bold statement there, Nick. I think it's the first time I've seen it.
Come out now. Nick, I can't answer for you. For
I
me,
know. I'm just putting it out there. Maybe one of the listeners can.
No, yeah, but your circumstances.
Listeners, get in touch with Nick. Tell him what to do.
Yeah, me personally, I'd be keeping my powder dry right now. I am keeping my powder dry right now.
That's good to know. That's good to know, because it's good to talk to other investors to see what they're doing. So, yeah.
I'm trying to do a deal right now, which is slightly different than what we normally do. It's a lease. It's a rent to rent, which definitely sounds risky when I say that after our conversation, right? But if the numbers work with the stress testing, then you have to maybe be a bit more braver than you normally would. But I do think there's going to be lots of opportunities. So in terms of actually purchasing stuff, I'm trying to get myself in a position where I've got access to a bit more cash, and I'm ready to take up opportunity.
Yeah, no, it's good. Good to know. Well, that's about an hour, guys. We probably better wrap it up. Jerry, tell us about all the exciting things you've got going on at the moment in terms of, like, your other things that you do aside from the investing.
So, I mean, like the restaurant, we do great pizzas, Nick.
I'm still to get one.
High Street Kinross, yeah. Well, in terms of our kind of consultancy stuff, it seemed quite natural for us because we've got a reasonable team now helping running our operations business. And it seemed quite natural when we were getting asked questions about commercial a lot to start doing more consultancy stuff. So hence the podcast, which is, I think we're about the same, about 150 episodes or something like that. Yeah, is that where we're at? Yeah, somewhere around about there. Which is great. And when I started that, there's no way I thought I'd get past 50. I'm like, there can't be 150 topics in commercial property, right?
Hats off to you, mate. Hats off, because like we find it tough and there's 2 of us and there's only one of you, and you've been consistent. It's a great achievement. Do
you know what though? There's so much to discuss. There are so many questions you get asked and stuff. You just got to keep writing them down, don't you? Somebody asks you a question like, do you know what? Geez, oh, that's an hour.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's been really good.
Here as well. We could have broke this chat down into about 4 or 5 different podcasts on this conversation alone, and dug deeper.
That's right, exactly. So that's been really good, and the serendipities from that have been fantastic. People have met, the opportunities that come up, the network I'm slowly building of commercial investors, because there isn't really one out there. That's something I've been really passionate about, is trying to create a network of people that are all in this space, because it's so, as I say, opaque and difficult to know what people are doing. Actually, having a group that are all active but with different strategies is really helpful. So I've been doing some masterminds and things, but my real focus now is one kind of a higher level, people that are invested in commercial and really trying to drive up forward and build up a portfolio. And the other part is the network. So I'm working on developing a good offer at a low price, so that people can get involved in a commercial network, as opposed to more intensive mastermind. So it's kind of just pushing those two apart. That's basically what we're at right now.
Cool. Excellent. Where's the best place for people to contact you?
Instagram, LinkedIn. Our website is where you'll find most of the bits and pieces and about the podcast. It's commercialpropertyinvestor.co.uk.
Cool. We'll put your links. We'll put your links in the show notes, and
thanks,
we
guys.
really appreciate your time.
Oh, I really appreciate being back on the show.
I've just got that image of the frog trying to climb out the boiling pot now. That's what I'm gonna leave. That's what I'm gonna leave with.
Should we make that as part of the image for this show?
Just don't put my face on the frog, right?
Oh, rather than
Photoshop there.
Put the frog in it, the frog in the boiling pan. Right, Gary, thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you doing a fab job.